what I wanted to focus this conversation on is ethics. So I figure we could spend the whole 2 hours on this topic. It's arguably probably the most important part of your theory. And
Mhm.
from my perspective, I feel like you have contributed something that's pretty new or novel to the field of ethics, because you've kind of provided a logical basis for morality. Whereas I think that's really difficult to do. A lot of ethical theories in the past have tried, but I think that yours, focusing on entropy reduction and how it logically connects with your metaphysics, where consciousness is fundamental and consciousness is an information system, so it's logically necessary for an information system. In order to survive, it has to continue to reduce its entropy,
Mhm.
which I interpret in the context of information as something like uh, creativity or production of novelty, or I even sometimes think of it in terms of like not getting bored. I don't know if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
it's part of it. Discovering new things, new ways, kind of blazing new trails. That's kind of the way evolution works. And you do that, and the ones that are profitable, you keep mining, and the ones that aren't profitable, you let go. So yes, that is the way it works. The big difference between me and other philosophers who've tried to come up with um, codes of morality and ethics is, as you say, one is that mine's based on entropy of the system and long-term entropy of the system. And the other thing is it's about intent, not about the doing.
Hmm.
Because tasks, if you just look at the action of what somebody does without the intent, then there are many cases that'll switch from entirely moral to entirely not moral, just because the intent changes, even though the action is exactly the same. So that's another concept that kind of puts me apart from the others. It's intent based, and it's based on basically lowering what has the highest probability of lowering the system entropy in the long term.
Right. In some of the ethics courses I've taken, there's a whole lot of focus on all these sort of puzzles or problems, sort of like the trolley problem, if you've heard of that,
Hmm. Hmm.
where it seems like there's just no right answer. And I think it's because they're placing the moral value on the action versus the intention, right? So your
Right.
theory sort of solves a lot of those issues because you're placing the value on the intent rather than the action itself.
Right. If you do the calculation and say how many people live, how many people die, what are the probabilities that if we take this path, it will actually work, and the probabilities that it won't, and you go through all those calculations and say, well, what's the optimal? Where are we going to make our choice that at least from what we know now, will optimize the long-term, you know, entropy reduction? And then you make that choice. And yes, some people live, some people die, whatever, but it's not, you make the best choice you can. And I think that's another thing that, you don't always know what the long-term entropy is going to do. You
Mhm.
don't always have that as a fact. So generally you can kind of guess at that, but it's hard to know, this affects that and that affects another thing and that other thing affects something else. And people can only see about 2 levels or 3 levels down that chain before they have no idea what's going to affect what and how it's going to come out. There's always unintended consequences that fall out of things. But your choice, whether it's ethical or not, is based on with what you know and understand, whether or not you make the best choice that you can make. And if you do, then If that turns out to be wrong, well, there's really no fault there. It's just a matter of, well, learn from it. All right, you did something that didn't turn out well. Why? What did you forget to consider? Where did your ego or fear get in the way in that choice, or your own self, what was better for you? And you analyze it, why you got it wrong, and then you learn. And from that learning, you grow up. So it doesn't, there's another, I guess, difference between me and the other philosophers. It doesn't really posit a group of perfect people who have who have a plan, a moral code, and therefore always get the right answer. That's not what a moral code does. The moral code allows someone to provide the very best answer that they can provide, given who they are, what they are, level of quality they've developed, the information they have, all of that. And if they conscientiously do their best, then they learn from it. So that means that in any case, evolution gets moved forward. Somebody maybe won't do something that's optimized, but they'll learn from it. So the learning is what moves, the entropy lower. The learning is the growing that the system's trying to create. So I create a system that tends to always move in increments of positive evolution, of entropy reduction, even if it was a wrong choice, but the person learned something significant about how to make better choices. That's still a win for the system, even if the optimal thing wasn't done, but the people got better, lowered their entropy, grew up some because of it. So it's really different than the typical philosophical approach. I think the other approaches are kind of naive in the sense that, one, that morality is based on action. You have immoral and moral action when, like I say, it's obvious that actions can be both moral and immoral based on your intent.
Hmm.
So that's not it. And if you base it on actions, there'll always be somebody who'll come up with something that doesn't fit your theory. Where obviously the right thing to do is the thing the theory says is immoral, So it always seems to have flaws. Like the last one I remember that was a big deal, I think was Spinoza, came up with a moral code. And of course, like all the rest, it did a lot of good, got a lot of people thinking about things. It was a very positive force in the world. It's not like that's a bad idea or anything. It was lovely, but it had its flaws. There's things that it just couldn't deal with properly. And
Right. There was
all of them, yeah, all of them fell in that same hole. And so then they make up new things to kind of cover those odd extremities, but there's always new holes showing up. And then like you say, you get these problems where it just isn't clear, where morality lies in those. Do you know, save
yeah,
yourself and your family because that's your obligation in life is to take care of your family, or do you save, you know, twice as many people doing something else? Where is that? Certainly have obligation to your family, but you have obligation to all people. But the obligations are different. They're not the same obligation. So you just can't come to any conclusion if you try to solve it by action, and that all the actions have to be even for the best. They don't. Like I say, some actions might have failed or not been the best, but you learn from them. That's still a positive for the system.
hmm,
So this moral code that I have uh, basically works. It works for the system. It keeps the system evolving. It keeps people evolving and allows people to make choices when they really don't know what the best answer is. Because that's another problem. If the moral code gets so complex that everybody gets to a moral choice and they have to sit down for 2 weeks to ponder all of the possibilities, well, that's not good. Yes, the train is going to wreck. You have to be able to make moral choices more economically than pondering over theories. You have to be able to make your best choice that you have. If you've only got 30 seconds in which to make that choice, you do the best you can. And then you learn from it. And that's okay. That's not seen as oh, bad person made a bad choice. That's seen as, oh, did the best you could, learn from it. Now you're a better person. So it's just a different viewpoint altogether of ethics. And the thing that's nice about it is it doesn't have exceptions. It doesn't say, yeah, well, it doesn't work here and it doesn't work there. It just works everywhere. It's universal.
Right. So one thing I kind of want to do is just walk through the logic of it, starting with your first assumptions and kind of building up, because I think there are some little details that could use clarification.
Hmm.
So to begin with, your entire system, it starts with the two assumptions. Your first assumption is that consciousness exists.
Hmm.
One thing I had a question about with regard to that is in your books, you have a lot of things that kind of lead up to consciousness exists. Uh, and I think that's so essentially what you're doing is consciousness exists as your assumption, but you provide a lot of conjecture about how consciousness might have come to exist. And I've
Hmm.
heard some people might have been confused about that with regard to your theory. So a lot of that is just conjecture of like how consciousness
Yeah.
might have formed. And what
Yes,
that is,
exactly.
right. And so with that, you posit a absolute unbounded oneness, a sort
Hmm.
of primordial energy that you say it goes through a sort of quickening where it it,
Yeah.
it
But
transforms into reality cells, you call them.
Yes, but not a primordial energy, a
Okay.
primordial information system.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
there's
Good.
a big difference there. We're not talking about energy. Energy
Good.
is simulated. Energy, is defined by certain information. So it's a primordial information system.
Okay. So it's originally one thing, and then it sort of turns itself into an unbounded series of reality cells that can flip to one and zero. Is that a good way
Yeah,
of?
yeah, yeah. I just got finished writing it. This little thing that I'm working on now. I kind of wrote it in a little different way than I had written it before. Um, But yes, you're right. It grows up, it evolves. So you have in the beginning the smallest possible, and I'm kind of taking the same path that biology does. Biology says, give me a cell, give me a living cell, and I will tell you how everything on this planet evolved. I tell you all the plants, all the animals, how it all evolved. We start with a bacterium. We start with a cell. And from there, the rest of it I can logically deduce from that one cell. So I start with about that same sort of thing. Give me a consciousness cell. Well, that smallest living cell is the simplest cell possible, which is probably a very simple bacterium.
Mhm.
The maybe even a virus. I'm not sure. Viruses are even simpler. I'm not quite sure which would be better there. So I start with the simplest instance of consciousness, which is a binary, an awareness that is aware that it can be in this state or that state. Well, that's what's consciousness? It's awareness with a choice. The choice is limited to this or that, so there's not a lot of choices there, but two is the smallest number you can have, otherwise there isn't a choice. It would be this or this, and that's not a choice. So if you want to create awareness with a choice, then it's awareness that can be in one of two states. So that's the simplest uh, thing that we can think of that fits the definition of consciousness. And from there, I let that develop into I say, what are the attributes of consciousness? And one of the attributes is memory. And the
Hmm.
reason you need memory is otherwise choice has no meaning. If you have
Right.
no memory, then everything you do is the first choice you've ever made. There is nothing. And also, you have to have some reason for making the choice that you make. So you have to have some processing, and you have some information, and you process that information, and then you make a choice. And that choice is supposed to lead you to closer toward your purpose, closest toward what you're trying to do. And
Hmm.
what you're trying to do is to lower entropy. That's what, that's the thing that defines the positive direction of evolution is that you lower entropy. So how can this one little binary thing lower entropy? Well, it has memory because that's part of being conscious. So it can remember that it had a one and then a zero and then another zero and then a one. Those were its choices. And now it can decide what to do next. So with its memory, it can create patterns because it's everything it has done in the past and what it chooses to do now to add to that. So with that, it can make patterns. And as it evolves more, and better memory, then it can make more complex patterns. So, and eventually you get the patterns and patterns of patterns and sequences of patterns of sequences and so on. It's just whether or not you have enough memory to keep all that straight as to what it is that you're doing and where you start and where you're going from now. So all of that is in memory. Then I take those little things and I call those like reality cells. Now, we have we can look at this then two ways. There are multiple reality cells. There's many of these little things. Or we can say that one, like a living biological cell, it splits in two. And now there's two of them. So whether it's that more of them exist or they learn how to duplicate themselves really is irrelevant. But I then say that there's more of those. And then they begin to cooperate and they share their memories. I have there's also a notion, and maybe this is, I don't know, it might even be a new assumption, but that all consciousness is netted
Mm.
because we find that's true. All consciousness can be aware of other consciousness. So they're all on this big net. So they're netted together, and therefore they can actually see each other's memory. It's very simple. So now you have something much bigger, much better. So this is kind of the difference between, you know, Aum and AUO and that kind of stuff. It's
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
evolutionary steps that you step up. So this collection of cells then forms a thing, and
Hmm.
that's what I'm calling the larger consciousness system. And then that thing at a higher level now of complexity, we started with the little cells, then we have groups of cells, now we have a thing, a being that's built out of those cells, and that being then takes parts of itself and splits off IUOCs.
Hmm.
So this whole thing, and if you look at biology, that's the way biology worked. It didn't work with there just happened to be a bunch of living cells around that cooperated it because it's a physical, now we're in the physical world, not the consciousness world of mind, but a physical world. And in the physical world, the cell splits. And then it finds out that two cells can be more survivable than one, and that 10 cells are more survivable than two. And that the more they cooperate with each other, the more flexibility they can create in the organism that they're making.
Okay.
And with that extra flexibility, they have more choices, more things they can do.
Hmm.
And all of that lowers the entropy and goes. So actually biological evolution is also evolution according to lowering entropy. It evolves the same way. It lowers entropy by making more, you know, more able to survive and procreate things. And it does that by more cooperation
Hmm.
between the pieces and growing more and more complex systems. All that's lowering entropy. So that's
Well, okay,
kind of revisit that. That's kind of the way that looked. And
okay.
I wasn't clear about that in the book so much as I kind of slid over it, kind of implied that. I used the word reality cells and
Hmm.
that these reality cells accumulate, but I didn't specify exactly how because that's kind of irrelevant. It's just, I know it could be another assumption that you not only have one of these consciousness things, but you have multiple of them, or the one is able to replicate itself into two. Um, that may be another assumption, actually. Speaking of assumptions, the two assumptions that consciousness exists and evolution exists are really just one assumption. But
Hmm.
I thought it would be, and that is that consciousness exists.
Yeah.
Consciousness is a self-changing thing that changes itself according to what it perceives as what's best for it. So if you have a self-changing system, then evolution is just making choices for one's own benefit, and that is kind of a natural thing that's going to happen. Just because it's conscious, it can make those choices,
Right.
and it, so the fact that there's evolution is not really an independent um, assumption. It's
I've
really
always,
falls right out of the first.
I've wondered myself if how closely linked are the concepts of evolution and choice. If your consciousness is awareness with a choice, it seems like evolution sort of requires the choice in a fundamental way. Uh, whereas if you didn't have choice, you may never have evolution, sort of thing. Is
Your
that
evolution, if you didn't have choice, your evolution would be random.
right?
And random evolution, if you don't have purpose, then you have randomness.
Right. And so probably it would not evolve very much, if at all, or but that's kind of a side point.
It would be very slow. Random
Okay.
evolution would be a very, very slow evolution. And
Right.
you just have to wait for something to happen that was positive. And then when that
Hmm.
happened, the positive could continue because it was positive and work better. And then you just have to wait for something else to happen. That's an extremely slow system.
Okay.
And our scientists, our biological evolutionists, they would say that our system is random like that. But
Hmm.
the science doesn't back that up. Statistics doesn't back that up. We
Right.
see all kinds of things that can't just be random. We have a moth, and the moth gets on a British ship, ends up over in London, where everything's dull and gray and blacks because all the smokestack industry has done that. And within like 15 years or 20 years, the moth turns from a white moth to a black moth. Okay, now if you just take a moth and look at the genetic code and see how many trials you'd have to have before you just randomly ended up with a black moth, that process should have taken, like 10,000 years, not 28 years, if it's just a random process, but it's not random. A moth is conscious, a moth wants to hide, a moth is white on black, and that's not very helpful. So that moth has an intention to be able to hide better. And that attention to be able to hide better skews the probabilities of how all that randomness works. And now, in 20 some years, that moth turned black because the moth is conscious. So, and that's true of all the other critters too. So, intent takes, that intent modifies future probability gives the critters that are evolving and the things, even the plants that are, well, I won't say the plants, the critters that are evolving that are conscious, it gives them some way to evolve much more quickly than just randomness. You know, it would be likely that that moth wouldn't survive long enough as a white moth to ever get to the point of becoming black by randomness. It just would take too long, and it's too, it wouldn't be able to make that transition. So when you leave everything to random, you really shut down the possibilities, and you make the evolution very, very slow and not smart. Whereas if you allow conscious things to change that. Now, there's another thing too that we don't generally think about, and that is that the larger consciousness system created this virtual reality for a purpose. Like any creator of a tool, and it's a tool, the virtual reality is a tool to help consciousness evolve. Like anybody who invents a tool, if the tool doesn't work right, or the tool is a little inefficient, or if you've made a shovel and the front end is blunt rather than sharp, so it's kind of hard to push it into the ground, well, you fix it. You change it. And the larger conscious system sometimes looks at what's going on, looks at the rate of evolution, and if it can do so without overrunning anything's free will, if it can do so, by remaining in the background, it may tweak this, tweak that. Oh, here comes a big meteor about a quarter the size of the Earth and it would destroy everything. I'm not going to let that happen just because that's what's going to happen, by random. Rid of that thing. It's a virtual reality. You just turn that off. You delete that. That possibility gets deleted. So the system doesn't keep its hands off entirely. The system wants to have a light touch. It doesn't want to overrun the free will of the avatars that are there. They have to have free will. It just can't come in and reorder everything and change their environment and do things. But if there's a process that needs to take place, if they really need more oxygen in the atmosphere to get to the next level, and that would take another 100 million years, then the system may just put more oxygen there. And we look at that, and that becomes a paradox. Oh, we were coming along like this, and suddenly more oxygen appeared, or suddenly this happened, or that happened. That that can happen. So some of the paradoxes we run into don't have logical explanations. They only have explanations that are, that transcend logic. So those are and I don't think they happen often. Mostly the system likes to let it alone because that way what it gets is the natural products of evolution, on this planet. It doesn't get a bunch of weird hybrid things that it's monkeyed with. So now we have four-legged cattle and three-legged cattle because the system wanted whether three legs would be more efficient. It just lets that stuff go so that it is natural. What you end up with is an entirely natural, logical product that follows all the rules, and that makes a much better virtual reality. So its intervention has to be invisible, that we don't see it. We just see the results of it. So like we have a time, I can't remember, I think they call it the Cambrian explosion or some kind of
Mhm.
thing like that, where suddenly the number of entities just seem to grow much faster than they had before.
Mhm.
And some of that is because, you know, events were taken to speed that up, I suspect. If you
Right.
have giant lizards that are suppressing the evolution of everything smaller than another giant lizard because they eat everything in sight, and evolution's kind of stumped because these guys just gobble up all the good tries that are going on. Well, then you do something to change that. You don't necessarily want to wait another million years to see if that fixes itself. You know Like a few volcanoes go off, dropping an asteroid or two, someplace where they raise a lot of dust, and suddenly, those big guys that are suppressing the evolution of other more interesting forms, they disappear, and all these interesting forms pop up. And if you want to seed that, well, you can. You can seed that with a bunch of kind of novel ideas that you think would make good avatars. So, so I believe there's some of that happening as well as just the logical stuff
Mm.
that is what we see mostly as logical, but it doesn't all have to be.
Okay. So I want to touch on using or our virtual reality being a tool for the system. So, I wonder sometimes, is it that, our evolution, me as a free will awareness unit evolving, I suppose it contributes to the evolution of my IUOC,
Hmm?
right? And is the purpose of that, how does it help the system as a whole? Is my IUOC being a little bit more evolved because of my efforts? Um, does it contribute because my IOC is now a contributing member of the larger consciousness system, or is it providing some sort of necessary energy of some sort that the system requires?
No, none of those. It's just it sums up all the little pieces. So you grow, you learn, you change who you are, and you become the kinder, gentler, more giving and caring person. All right. That lowers the entropy of your free will awareness unit. That free will awareness unit, now, when it goes back and the partition's taken down and it reemerges with the IUOC, that lowers the entropy of the IUOC because it had those experiences. And the IUOC is just a piece of the larger consciousness system. So that lowers the entropy of the whole consciousness system.
Mm,
So your growth is just an increment of growth, and all those increments from all the things that are evolving and growing change the system's level of entropy because we're all part of the system. So because you're a part of the system, when you grow, the system grows up at just a little bit too because you're a piece of that system. So in a very real way, we IUOCs and free will awareness units, we are part of the larger conscious system strategy for its own evolution. Make a whole bunch of these things and let them all, evolve in bits and pieces, and I'll evolve with them. So you have part of the larger, and that's the system. The system's everything. Part of that system is, say, the operating system. It's the old part of the system, the part that was there originally that made the IUOCs. You've got that part of the system, and that acts like the operating system. It acts like the thing that might reach in and tweak the simulation if it's necessary. So you have that, which kind of an older executive part, making choices and husbanding the rest of it. And then you've got all the IUOCs who then, through multiple experiences, through the free will awareness units, are growing up. And you see that growth. The growth is cumulative. It's not random at all. It's cumulative. And if you look over the last, just from that part of the uh, system entropy that goes from human beings walking around on the earth, Homo sapien, it becomes a real thing. And that's about only 200,000 years ago. And if you look at that, the next, 190,000 years, not much changes. Just little bits change. Okay, a few things change. We learn to work together in smaller groups called tribes,
mm,
and we give to those groups. We care about those groups. Smaller tribes eventually get bigger tribes, and bigger tribes eventually get cities. Cities eventually get a division of labor. So there's carpenters and people who take care of horses and people who make arrows, and you have lots of different things like that, which now allows for a whole lot more people to succeed in a way that they have the extra time to ponder the nature of reality and grow up and succeed in the time, in the sense that they make choices and they can look back and see, well, how did those choices go? So it gives them the opportunity to grow up. They still don't grow up very much because it's a very rough and crude place where life is cheap. So it goes on, and then you look at the last 500 years and you can see more growth toward people caring about each other and being nice to each other in the 500 years than for all the time before it. So you realize that this evolution accelerates. This consciousness evolution accelerates. The more you grow up, the easier it is to grow up more. Because every time you grow up some, you help the people around you grow up some, who help the people around them grow up some. So it's a positive kind of thing. And because the whole system and our virtual reality as well grows up or succeeds based on the entropy level. If we are kinder to each other, then we as a whole can do more. Just like the cells back when there was an animal of 10 cells and an animal of 1,000 cells, it creates flexibility. It creates an ability to do more, have more choices, creates decision space, creates more successes. So we're like that too. You get more and more humans that are kind and caring toward each other, then humanity can do more, is more effective, can
Hmm.
can evolve more. So eventually we'll make it because that evolution is, that's the forward direction of evolution. And evolution may be slow, but it just keeps churning on. It doesn't stop. So even if we go backwards and end up bombing ourselves back to the Stone Age, well, we'll start at the Stone Age and start going forward again because that's just the nature of the system. So it's relentless in its effort to evolve. So that's why
Okay,
I know we'll actually get there.
right. Um, and you know, so we as humans, by cooperating and lowering our entropy, we can do more. But I'm guessing it also means our IUOCs. I don't know if it makes sense to say that they cooperate or they do more, or like the system itself can do more as a result of our evolution here.
Yeah, the system's more capable. Now it's in such small increments that it's maybe hard to imagine that, but any system that's improving itself, those improvements allow it to do more and be more. Every time something lowers its entropy, the system can be more effective than it could be otherwise. So if we have you have a bunch of humans together and we learn to cooperate and care, then we could easily provide enough food and clean water for everybody. We could easily make sure that people weren't starving to death, and that people who were bright could move up the chain of education and contribute. I mean, all those things are within our ability to do now. What we don't have is the will. We don't have the understanding. We have not grown up enough to make those kinds of choices. But as we make those choices, then we as human beings can accomplish so much more.
Mm-hmm.
We can make the place better for others and for more. We can start taking care of the planet. We can, fix the global warming issues. We can make better choices. So everything works better. And it's the same with the larger consciousness system. It's got all of these, IUOCs there, and it and all the IUOCs make up the whole system. Okay, and free will awareness units, all of that. But we'll just call it the IUOCs because the free will awareness unit's just a piece of that. And as they get better, as they evolve, then the system can do more. The system has more flexibility, more power. it may be able to, divide and start off another system. It may have that kind of a capacity to do things like that. It may it may make a whole bunch of other systems that can evolve. There was a book written by Isaac Asimov, written all the way back in the 80s, partly. And the first books were back into the 70s and 80s. The last books were in the 2000s. But it was all in one series, and it was called The Foundation.
Mm.
And I don't know how many books it has in it. It may have like 15 or 20 books, but they were written at different times. And he's the only one that I've ever seen it really explore this problem in fiction. And he has this one planet. He has this one planet, and these people have learned to cooperate, and they've learned to work together in harmony, and they care about each other. And so he has the kind of the protagonist is out there saying, "Yeah, but that means you're all the same. You all kind of move in unison. It's like, you're all cells in a big machine." And she says, "No." This is a she from that planet. She says, "No, we're all different. We're all independent, and we all can follow our own path to do what it is we want to do." And he says, "How can you all follow your own path and still, work together?" Well, it's not that they're building, you know, a bigger war machine. It's that they have built their cooperation becomes mental, spiritual. They've built a big mind machine. So the people, the avatars, can do whatever they do, however they like, but they're part of this larger mind system. And this mind system is really, really powerful. With that mind system, they can reach right out and modify things all over a galaxy. They can change, they can make huge changes. And eventually, as the book goes on and on and on, this this one planet ends up basically not just say taking over, but creating a whole galaxy full of cooperators and people who care. And that gains even more power that can reach out and modify other galaxies and help. So the power keeps growing. So, but it's not a bunch of people get shoulder to shoulder and bind together like a bunch of cells do. When cells cooperate, they all form different organs and there's different organs work together. Here it's a bunch of people who can be very individualistic and do whatever their desires, lead them to do. But in a mind space, they create something powerful. And that intent can modify physical probability very, very powerfully because the intent is so strong. Because it's a whole world's worth of intent. It's a whole, billions of people with highly evolved minds focusing their intent together. And so anyway, he had that in his book. And when I read that I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, I said, somebody has taken this idea of evolving toward lower entropy, and where does that lead? Where does that end up, in the universe? And what it ends up doing is actually kind of like um, colonizing, not really. It doesn't go take anything over. It doesn't use force. It just uses its intent to help people see bigger pictures. It teaches. So it's the only place where I've seen somebody take that concept. A lot of fiction is particularly high science and what is it,
Science
sci-fi,
fiction,
but that and also this other thing,
fantasy.
fantasy. Yeah, fantasy and sci-fi kind of mixed together. Often explore ideas and concepts and see how they might play out. And this is one that it's the only one I've ever seen that basically tried to see what was the logical consequence of people growing toward love. And it was pretty interesting. So that's what I mean by bigger power. See, we're talking about how does a larger conscious system grow? How does it get a bigger power? Because we're more cooperative. Well, we energize that mind space in a way that it's not energized before. A whole bunch of cooperative people can just do a whole lot more. Eventually, if you get enough of them, you can maybe do things that would consider impossible and paranormal. uh, Move heavy things with their minds, just because they can manipulate probability. So it just allows more choices, more things you can do, more ways that you can be helpful and useful to others. So this particular planet, it never attacked or fought or used violence. You know, it wasn't overcoming its its galaxy by force. It was overcoming its galaxy by persuasion.
Right. You know, one thing that I've found fascinating about your ethical theory is so you could argue that the there's a whole philosophy that's sort of based on the idea that you can create order through force and control and manipulation. And so there's an interesting idea where you have two opposing ideas about how to create the most order.
Hmm.
And you can break those down into maybe control versus love. And your idea is that love actually creates more order, you know because when you try to use control and force, you actually create an opposition to what you're trying to do. Like anytime you're trying to force and manipulate people.
Right, exactly. Exactly. So it's the thing is that, all right, we can have order. We can make a whole bunch of soldiers, and they can march in file, and they look, well, look at all that order. They even move their feet at the same time. That's tremendous order. All right, but that doesn't make soldiers a low entropy thing. You have to look. Entropy is a thing that's measured for a system. You have to look at the whole system. So our system here is pretty much our planet, and everything that's on it. That's kind of the system we usually talk about. Then we can think of a bigger system, which is our solar system, and then a bigger system than that, which is our galaxy. But for the most part, what we can change and affect is pretty much relegated to what happens on this planet for now. And in that case, you look at the whole system. You can say, okay, I've got a whole bunch of SS troopers and they can all march in order, pick their feet up at the same time, and that lowers entropy by this much. And now those same soldiers can terrorize and rip things apart and kill people and rip families apart. It can create so much high entropy and that little bit of low entropy because they all march in line. So it's like they create this much high entropy and they add back that much low entropy. So when you look at what their effect is in the whole system, it's obviously negative. And if you look at any control, power, and force, any way you want to do that, you know, all of the lower entropy is minor, minuscule compared to the higher entropy that it creates. So sure, you can force things to be a certain way, but in doing that, you'll create more entropy than what you lowered. And usually it's by a very big margin. So
Right.
that's the problem. And you say, well, okay, I'm just going to do something that doesn't hurt anybody. I'm going to take all the rocks I find and I'm going to lie them, in a pile, or I'm going to put them in a line, and that lowers entropy. Well, maybe that doesn't hurt anybody, so you haven't raised anybody's entropy, but the amount of entropy you've lowered is minuscule because
Mm.
entropy is not just a measure of how many things you can line up. Entropy is a measure of what you can do that's significant and meaningful, what you can do that matters. All things are not the same. If you look at the system, the things in a bunch, the whole Earth with a bunch of a bunch of rocks in a line, doesn't change much. It doesn't really provide much value. Therefore, the entropy reduction just in the pattern is minuscule. It's
Hmm.
extremely small. Doesn't hurt much either. So it may add a tiny little bit of lower entropy. Maybe it's a landmark now. Now people get to that line. Maybe it'll give them some kind of a landmark that people can use to navigate by or something. So there may be some usefulness to it, but just ordering is typically a minute entropy reduction, whereas forcing things tends to be a much larger entropy creator. If you're forcing other beings, not just forcing rocks to lie in a line, but forcing beings, you go shovel this pile, you do this, you start telling people what to do. Typically,
Right.
that's a big entropy
I
increase.
think
Now,
the I. Oh, sorry.
if you tell them what to do in the sense that we're all working together, these things all need to be done. Let's work together. And somebody comes up with a plan, then executing that plan can be a very low entropy thing. So it's not just ordering things by, we need this pile of dirt over there and we need these things over here. But if you just grab people off the street, take them out of whatever they're doing and bring them over and make them forced labor, that's really high entropy.
Hmm. Right.
If you get it done by organizing people, giving them a good wage, and everybody working together and helping each other, that's low entropy.
Right.
So it
Yeah.
has nothing
So
to
I think.
do with how well everybody marches in line. That's so minuscule that
Mhm.
it's irrelevant.
Yeah, I think the idea is typically, trying to, if you have someone that has an idea of how everyone should be, we should all be good people, and then forcing everyone to be good. Or say you have a big problem like climate change, and we can't all cooperate to solve the problem. If you have some dictator who can just force everyone to do the right thing, you can accomplish something. That's sort of the idea of the
Yeah,
control and force.
doesn't yeah, doesn't work.
Right. And your idea is it's more focused on the individual level becoming a better person kind of organically and helping others to do the same. Um, I would say it's, the people who are arguing for a control and force solution to certain problems probably are thinking, that's never going to happen. And this is at least a much faster way of
Hmm.
solution. Uh, I would say your idea is that it's really the only solution is the love solution, us
Yeah.
growing up at the individual level.
Now, some control and force is okay along the way, but it's only temporary. It's not the way you set out to run things. So let's talk about law, okay, and criminals. So we have laws, and basically, why do we have criminal law? Because people aren't very grown up. So you have a lot of people who are low quality consciousness, and because of that, they're very destructive. And if they get to a point where their destructiveness goes so far, then there's a law that says you can't do that. You can't just kick the door in your neighbor's house and say it's yours now because you have more guns than your neighbor does. The law doesn't allow that because that's disruptive to the society. That raises entropy in the society. So yes, you can have laws, and laws are things where you control. Here are the laws. You break the laws, you go to jail, and we will decrease your free will by keeping you in that jail because we don't trust you to be, a cooperative citizen. So yes, there's times that force is necessary, but force is can always be a temporary solution, not the solution. So what happens, you can say, all right, global warming is a big problem. the nations of the world just can't solve it because they're all greedy and self-centered. So what we need is a master of the universe to come in here and kick some butt, tell everybody what they need to do, and just get the job done, and then we could deal with this in a sensible way. Well, yes. Now, if the world were made of, or if the people that are coming and doing that are all perfect people, they all have extremely low energy. I mean, low entropy. Well, then that might work. They could come in and fix things, and then they'd pat us all on the rump and leave. They'd say, "All right, we've got you out of the hot water. Now here's your path forward. Now go on." But it doesn't work that way. In a society where almost everybody is high entropy, that means when you get that bunch of people that are going to force the others, a lot of those people doing the forcing are high entropy people because that's just the people. You just reach out and grab a thousand people out of the world's population. Most of them are going to be high entropy.
Hmm.
So now you're going to have a bunch of high entropy people that you're going to give the job of telling everybody else what to do. Are they, at the end, after they've accomplished their mission, going to walk away, bless everybody, pat us on the rump, and leave? No, it's not going to work that way. Now, suddenly you have this totalitarian state that doesn't have global warming, but everybody else you know, has to have a boot on their neck. That's the problem. So the only reason you ever need control, power, and force as a tool, the only reason is if you have fairly large group of low quality people in your system. If you had high quality people in your system, you wouldn't need criminal law. You could throw all the criminal law out because everybody there would be trying to help and be nice and help other people out. Nobody would steal or lie or murder or do any of those things. That would be a horrible thing to do. But because we have so many people who are high entropy, low quality of consciousness, well, now we need to bring in some control, power, and force to regulate dysfunction. So the only reason you ever need control is because of the dysfunction. Why do we need somebody to come in and kick butt and fix this global warming? Because we have such low quality of people all over in various governments. They're greedy, they're self-centered, they want to pump more oil and get richer rather than help the environment. That's why.
Hmm.
So you don't take a bunch of high entropy, low quality people and allow them to force and bully everybody else into doing the right thing, because all you end up with is a dictatorship that lasts ever longer. It's
Right.
not, the point is that doing, control, power, and force is dysfunctional, period. But if you use it to control dysfunctionality that's already there, well, okay, I'll salute that, but only as a temporary measure. As people grow up, you need to remove that. You need to stop doing that. Like we have all kinds of laws on the books now that are ridiculous. Things that prohibit people from doing this and prohibit people from doing that. And there's really no logic behind it. It's all just historical garbage that we've drug along because there's a lot of high entropy people in the culture that like the idea of forcing other people to be the way they want them to be. So they keep these laws on the books. So the thing is, the control power force crew can make a decent case for for getting a job done. But what happens is in the long term, it always turns out to be worse. In the
Right.
long term, you end up with a big dictatorship that suppresses people for the next millennia, because you've replaced all the governments with one big force that can force all the governments to do whatever they want. And
Yeah.
it just it turns bad. So it's not doing things that are high entropy always sow the seeds of their own destruction. So you go out and you say, all right, I want to live in a neighborhood like this, so I'm going to go around and terrorize all my neighbors and make them, fly the American flag because that's what I want them to do. So I'm going to pass a law. Says you live in this community, you have a flag up at sunrise and you take it down at sunset every day, or else there's punishment. Well, you can do that, and a lot of people would cheer you. Oh, what a great idea. We should do that all over. But what you've done is that you've sown the seeds of of your own destruction. You made all these people unhappy and miserable. They all want to get rid of you. They'd
Mm,
all like for you to be gone. They all now, who used to maybe be good citizens and like the United States, now they don't anymore because the United States is coming down our throat, forcing them to do these things. So suddenly your citizens don't like you anymore, and eventually that leads to chaos, civil war, and another whole government. See, so the control power force sows the seeds of its own destruction,
mm,
and that's because the control power force comes out of low quality of consciousness. The way we solve problems is by force. That's a low quality of consciousness concept, and that will, over time, create more problems than the problem that that force was supposed to solve.
mm,
And that's just kind of fundamentally the way it works. So, yes, we have laws, we lock up people that we don't like because they break those laws. Sometimes we lock up people with those laws just because we're prejudiced against them and they're easy to grab up off the street. And we lock them up too.
mm,
See? Well, why do we do that? Well, because we have a lot of, low quality people in the system. Well, when you have a lot of low quality people in the system and you have a system of force and control, it starts doing bad things. It starts creating resentment. It starts creating problems. And that makes it all the harder for us all to live together in peace and help each other. Because now you have half the society hating the other half. It just makes you go backwards from where
mm,
you want to go. So I would argue that the control power force is only necessary where you have a lot of poor quality people, and it should never be more than temporary. And it must be very rigorously evaluated often to make sure it doesn't grow into something ugly.
mm. Yeah,
Because
I think.
give people with low quality of consciousness power, and you're guaranteed to end up with something ugly.
Mhm,
And you're going to always be giving it to low quality people because they're the majority. They're the 99%. So you can't take any bunch of people and give them power that you're not giving it to a bunch of low quality people because most of us are low quality people. That's why it
right.
doesn't that's why it doesn't work.
And even if you did give it to a low or a high quality person, like Marcus Aurelius famously was the king,
Hmm.
then either he dies or his son takes over, and then you're
Some
right back where
low
you started. Right.
exactly. Until you generally raise the quality of consciousness of the whole society, the whole system, then it's just it's not going to work. So yeah, we do that, and a lot of people say, "Oh, if we could get rid of that dictator and get rid of those lying politicians and do all this, everything would be great." It wouldn't be great if we don't change the people. We're going to end up with the same thing, in a short period of time. Give it 50 years, and it's all going to be the same as it was. Because okay, you put a really good guy in there. Well, there's one good guy, but there's thousands of bad guys plotting how they're gonna take over that one good guy. It's not gonna work. It won't last.
Right. Yeah. And another part of your philosophy that I've found interesting is, a lot of people on the control power force side of things would kind of think that, the love and kindness is a weakness in a way.
Hmm.
Um, and, just like what you've been talking about, you're not advocating pure pacifism where you just let people run all over you. And
No, not at all.
so I think, an interesting thing about your philosophy is that it's, you know, there's a focus on caring about others and love and cooperation, but it's also at the same time, there's a strength there. If there's something that requires force,
You
you
use
know,
force,
use
but you
force.
use it as the last resort and you use it very carefully and
Hmm.
make sure that when it's no longer needed, you dismantle it. You stop
Right.
using force. And that will work fine as long as the people who create and use the force are all, low entropy people. They're all high quality people. Then the force will work just as advertised and it'll be a wonderful thing. It won't have any tail of high entropy, later downstream. But if the people who are designing and using that force for the good of everyone end up with a majority of low quality people, then you've just created a monster. That monster will live as long as they can make it live. So,
Right.
so the whole problem gets back to the quality of consciousness in the
Yeah.
population.
Right.
That's the key thing. Everything else is a symptom. That crooked politician is a symptom of that low quality of consciousness in the population.
Right. So on that point, um, so it's at the individual level, lowering entropy is what's important.
It's important.
Um, so the details of that, you know, uh, cleaning your room is lowering entropy in a way.
Right.
Uh, Meditating, getting your thoughts still is lowering entropy.
Yes.
Um, Making choices about other rather than self, that's lowering entropy. What would you, if you could kind of detail a outline of what it means to lower your individual entropy, what would you like,
Well,
what is more important, like when I'm thinking about lowering my entropy, is it, say you have someone that's making poor choices but their mind is very clear and still, or is that person going to have lower entropy than someone who's making good choices but their mind is kind of chaotic and random thoughts all the time?
no. Now the key is the choices they make.
Okay.
You can have a clear mind and be evil. You can, evil can be smart, evil can be clever, evil can be well educated, and evil can be well organized, well thought out, well planned. It can do all those things. That's not the point. It's how much entropy do the results of their choices make? That's what's important. Now, you as an individual, you would like to become a lower entropy being. Then the thing you have to accomplish is to make better choices. Choices not about you, not because it's good for you, but
Hmm.
because it's good for everybody. Care
Hmm.
about people, and you're not acting nice. You're really nice. You're acting like you're not acting that you care, but you really do care for people.
Hmm.
Now, if that's what you're after is to change to where you do that naturally. You're not doing it out of your intellect. That's acting. You naturally are caring person. Okay, that's where you're trying to go. Now, how do you get there? Well, part of the way you get there is by picking up your room, making the bed, doing all these things because an orderly life, helps you keep order in your own mind. It helps you think orderly. Your mind often is an expression of your environment. You see people, they live in a mess. Typically, their mind is a little messy too. Not always, but it's just, it tends to run that way. So being being neat, making your bed and keeping your room clean, that is something that you do because you don't live in that house by yourself. There's other people live in there, and they don't want to live in your mess. They don't want all your dirty dishes sitting in the sink for a week. So they will wash them for you. They will pick up your room for you. They will do those things. But now you are, creating work, probably creating resentment. You're creating things that aren't very positive. So being polite, being clean, picking up your room, all these things are good social things to do. Now, you live in your house by yourself and nobody's there but you, then it doesn't matter quite so much. You could be kind of a slob, but you'd realize being a slob is not as efficient as being low entropy because you want to find that book. Stuff strewn all over the place, books here, books there. It takes you forever to find that. You want to find that note you made, and you want to do this and want to do that. You want to find a clean shirt, and you can't find them because all the shirts are just in a great big pile in the corner somewhere. You find out that your whole life gets more difficult if you don't live it in an orderly fashion. So though you could live by yourself in a cave and be a slob and it wouldn't affect anybody else, but it would make your own life less efficient, less able to work, less able to get things done. It raises the entropy in your own life. So, yes, the little things, being neat, being considerate of other people, those are significant, but they by themselves aren't going to make you a better person. You can just be the neatest person around, always say please and thank you, and be very respectful of everybody, but you're still self centered. You still use people. You still need things to be your way. You get upset when you don't get what you want. So, but those things help. They help you move in the right direction. So I'd say all of the above. Yes, do them all. But the thing you have to do mostly is look at life in this one way. Life presents you with circumstances. In life, stuff happens. You get to deal with it. Quality of the choices in which you deal with it, that's what's going to make you grow up or not. Now, the way you go through life is you say, all right, this stuff happened. I got to deal with it. But I don't know what the lowest entropy path is. I can see a bunch of paths, and some of them, they all have the goods and their bads about them. What do I do? Well, you give it due diligence. You think about it. You look as far as you can as to how this might affect that, might affect something else. You come to a decision over what your low entry path is, and you do it. You don't say, I can't make a choice because I don't know the answer, because I don't want to be wrong. You make your best choice. You move forward, and you keep your eyes and ears open and learn something. You look at it, a week later, 2 weeks later, 6 months later, a year later, 10 years later, and say, was that a good choice? Did I make a good choice there? And if everybody was better off because you made that choice, then it probably was a good choice. But you got your way, but a whole lot of other people got hurt. It's probably a really bad choice. And then you look at it and say, why did I make that choice? Why did I think that was the best choice? And then you'll realize, oh, it's because I'm self-centered. I made that because it was about me. That's what I wanted. That's what was best for me. And then you have to have an intention that says, I don't want to be that way. And you try not to be that way. You make an effort not to make choices based on what you want, but based on what's best for everyone. So that's how it does. And eventually you just grow up. That's the pulling yourself up by your bootstraps kind of thing. You have to have the desire, though, to grow up, a real actual desire to grow up, not at the intellect, but at the being level. And if you do, then you will grow up. You'll just end up learning the lessons. You'll see the mistakes. You'll stop making the mistakes. I talked to a young lady the other day and I said, how's your life going? And she says, pretty good and generally, but yesterday I acted like a 3-year-old. And I thought, well, good for you. Not that you acted like a 3-year-old, that wasn't so good, but that you realized you act like a 3-year-old. That's good. Okay, you made a mistake, you made some poor choices, but you realized you made a mistake and made poor choices, and that's the path to outgrowing them,
Mm.
to growing up. Most people who are self-centered have absolutely no idea that they're self-centered. Self-centeredness is completely invisible to people. People have very good justification for every choice they make. At least
Mhm.
they think they do. People who are self-centered don't think that. If you ask them, are you a self-centered person? They'd say, no, I'm a giving person. I'm helpful. I do things for people. I'm not self-centered. And they may be very self-centered. You can't see it unless you look for it. You don't notice that you just acted like a 3-year-old unless you're looking for it, unless you can kind of stand outside of it and see. So the
Mm.
growth is a long process that takes strong intent to grow up, and then you will. But it's not quick. Your bad decisions serve as stimulus for your reconsideration of why you made them. But if you just make choices and say, well, it didn't turn out so well, and then you make another one and so on, and you're not growing up at all. You're not learning from mistakes. So mistakes are not a problem. Not learning from a mistake is a problem. That's why making a mistake isn't necessarily an unethical or a bad thing to do. If you did the best you could with the information you had and that was it, and maybe you're high entropy, maybe you're very self-centered, you made it on self-centered bounds, but if you look at it later and learn from it, that's okay. That's good. That's how we grow up. We don't want a bunch of people too afraid to make choices because they don't know the right answer. They don't want to be wrong. That doesn't make you grow up either. That just frustrates you, leaves you nowhere, unable to move forward. So the point is, stuff happens, you get to deal with it. Whether you evolve or de-evolve has to do with the quality of how you deal with it. Do you deal with it with love and caring and consideration, or you deal with it for a way that's always in your best interest?
Um, one thing I've kind of always wondered is if you look at, you know, our reality as a tool for evolution, an interesting aspect of our reality is it seems like, you can imagine reality being in such a way that all the things that are typically considered vices, like alcohol or nicotine or sugar, that these are actually good for you. They don't harm your health in any way. But it seems like something about our reality, it's designed such that all of these like free pleasure type things that we consider vices like nicotine and alcohol, they all come with a big cost. So it almost seems like reality is designed so that it's teaching us some lesson about renouncing such worldly pleasures. And it is there.
Yeah, it's not the pleasure that it's renouncing. It's the quality of the choice in doing it.
Okay.
That's the problem. In other words, okay, you can go get a bottle of whiskey and get drunk and feel really good, like you're the smartest man in the world, and you and your friends can sit around and solve all the world's problems in a couple of hours, and you can feel really good about that too. But the reason that you made the choice to do that, that you choose to pick up that bottle and drink from it, means that you are not satisfied. You don't like who you are. You're not satisfied with you. You need to make yourself different. In order to be happier, you need to drink or take a drug or, you know, have sex or whatever it is that is, that makes you feel happy. But that's a poor decision. You need to find out the cause of why you're unhappy. Why am I unhappy? Not let's take a drug and make me happier or make me so blotto that I don't care that I'm unhappy. So it's the poor choice. Trying to cover it up with a drug, self-medicating. Basically, I'm living my life very poorly, making poor decisions. So I've got a lot of strife and dysfunction in my life. So I'll fix that by drinking. And then I won't care about all the dysfunction in my life, at least not while I'm drunk. I won't care at all about it. I won't even think about it. And that gives me relief. So that's what I do. So that in the scheme of stuff happens and how do you respond to it, you're responding very badly.
Mm.
Stuff happens like your life sucks. Well, what are you going to do about it? Trying to erase it with drugs or distractions or, take an interest in, with hobbies, with other things, trying to distract yourself from it. That's not a good choice. That's a high
Mm.
entropy choice. You have to look at it and say those things, you know, won't help me fix the problem. They help me avoid the problem. Avoiding the problem isn't useful. So most people self-medicate and do drugs and go into pleasures because they're trying to escape the dysfunction that is them. They don't really like themselves and they're trying to lose themselves in distraction or in drugs or some other kind of behavior like that. That's typically why. So it does, it's a poor choice is the problem. Now, if you were a low entropy person and you decided that every Saturday night you were going to, drink a glass of whiskey, well, it probably wouldn't cause any trouble. Probably wouldn't bother you if you were really a good person. You it would be not a very good choice in that it makes you ineffective while you're in that state. You're ineffective. You can't be helpful. You can't do anything for anybody. You can't even be helpful to yourself in that
Mm.
state. So it takes you out of being helpful. So that would be good. But let's say you don't drink a glass. You just drink 1 ounce, just 1 ounce, and you do that every Saturday. Well, so what? Makes no difference. Makes your throat warm. Gives you a tiny little buzz maybe, but doesn't do much. Well, then you'd look at that and say, well, there's no problem there. There's no high entropy being generated. There's not a bad decision. It's not necessarily a good decision either. It doesn't aid, it doesn't help you do anything any better, but it doesn't hurt it that much either. So it's just kind of neutral decision.
Mm.
So in that case, but to come out and say, drinking alcohol is evil, well, that's not true. Now you're generalizing to a lot of situations that, you shouldn't be generalizing to. You need to talk to individuals and not pass rules that affect everybody when they're not really good for everybody.
Mm.
That's part of the problem with our laws. We we pass laws to avoid certain kinds of behaviors, but we trap people sometimes that if they broke those laws, it would be a good thing because they're in a totally different situation from what we had in mind when we made the laws.
Mm.
So there needs to be exceptions to the laws, but we don't do that very well. We make those very difficult. You have to get arrested first before you can plead for an exception. Uh, it, there's very little review of the laws or why they were made or are they still effective. That's kind of our problem. But no, I don't think. I think those behaviors, the vices you're talking about, most of those are just poor choices. There's other
Okay.
things they could do with that time that would be more helpful.
So it's
But
kind of like the stick and the carrot. The system knows that those are bad choices and kind of make sure that there's some kind of consequence to making to trying to avoid.
yeah, except it's all natural. The system doesn't have to create a consequence. The consequence is created by the behavior.
Mm. Okay.
The system doesn't have to create a consequence. You you drink too much, and because of that, you miss something important. Because of that,
Mm.
you aren't where you're supposed to be. Because of that, nobody picked your child up from school that night. Now your child's missing. Your behavior creates the consequences. So the system doesn't have to create, ah, look at this person doing unuseful things, will create some consequences. The consequences are created all by yourself. Now, if the system, you're a person of interest and the system wants to help you learn a lesson, it might create a consequence for you, just, to help you learn. It's possible, but in general, the system doesn't butt in. But if it thinks you're capable of doing better and capable of learning and you're interested, it might create a circumstance to get your attention, to help you come to a conclusion. So it does that sometimes. It works with
Right.
people, but
Well, I'm just thinking of
it does it pretty carefully.
in terms of, like nicotine, it causes heart problems and lung issues, and alcohol causes liver issues, and sugar causes a lot of problems for people, and they all seem to have some sort of consequence. And it seems like, if you really want to be very low entropy person, it comes with sort of, I've heard your diet is pretty strict. Um,
Mhm.
and I've tried to have a diet as close to yours as as I could at some point, and it's really hard to avoid all of these things, especially sugar and carbohydrates and things like that. And nicotine is something that I've enjoyed in the past, and alcohol every now and then, and things like that. So, I mean, I guess the point of it is sort of just facing reality head on and
Yes.
not trying to.
If your body has functions according to the rule set, and if the rule set says that if you drink alcohol regularly, it's going to affect your liver in a negative way, or not so much it's going to affect your liver, it raises the probability that you're going to have a liver problem. If you drink over this much, if you drink less than that much, probably won't have a liver problem. But then that's probable. Some people only drinking a little bit will create a liver problem. Other people can drink gobs their whole life and never have a liver problem. So it's all based on probability.
Mm,
All that stuff is based on probability. So when you know that, certain things are not really contributing to your health,
mhm,
then eating them just because everybody else does or because they taste good is not a good choice.
mhm,
So, you say, well, sugar isn't helpful. It's really hard to get off sugar because sugar's in everything. It's almost you go down the grocery store and say, oh, sugar, put that back, sugar, put that back. By the time you're done, you leave the grocery store empty-handed because sugar's everywhere. Well, with time, you'll find things that don't have sugar in them, and you'll be able to make things that don't have sugar in them. And it's just that transition that's difficult.
mm,
Transition's hard, but once you've made that transition, then it gets pretty easy because then you get kind of in a new groove, and that new groove knows these brands that don't put sugar
mm,
and so on, and it gets to be simple, and you learn to do things and make things that you like that are also healthy.
mm,
So it's a matter of, like losing weight. It's a matter of lifestyle change more than anything else. It's not
mm,
that hard to maintain if you can change old habits. It's not that hard to do if you change old habits, but old habits are old habits. They're a little hard to break. And I also uh, don't think it's a good idea to be, what shall I say, obsessed with the details. All right,
mm,
you don't eat sugar, and if you're someplace and the only thing that you can eat has a little sugar in it, well, it's probably better to get something to eat than not. Or if you go to your friend's house and they serve meat and you don't want to eat meat, it's better to be nice to your friend than it is to, raise a ruckus and make his wife feel bad that she served something that you couldn't eat and now she has to go find something else and she's up in a tizzy. Then, you know,
mhm,
it's better to look at the bigger picture. So I don't think being obsessed with perfection in your diet is necessarily good. your health isn't going to be changed by what you ate one night. Your health is
mm,
changed by the kind of things you eat over the past, 5 years.
mm,
Got a long-term thing. It's if you once in a while eat things that otherwise you don't, that's not going to hurt your health. It's so, some people get really way over, hard over on things like that. And yeah, they'd be invited to somebody's house and they'd say, no, I just can't eat any of that. That stuff's no good.
mm,
Well, that's rude. If somebody has invited you someplace and cooked your dinner, there's no need to be rude.
mm,
You can eat as little of it as you can get by with, or ask when they're serving it, say, no, don't give me very much, or just neglect to take any of that, take other things. But it's you have to not be so crazy about it that you end up creating more entropy than you're using. So you can go off your diet now and then, but if your general diet most of the time is good, then your health is going to be good. So it's that sort of thing. So I'm pretty much vegan, but not really all the time. There's some things I'll put some cheese on once in a while, just
mm,
because I want to, and it tastes fine. But generally, I stay away from dairy. If somebody offered me a glass of milk, I wouldn't drink it. I'd say, well, pour that back in a container. I'd rather have a glass of water.
mm.
That's not a big thing. That's not really, no, being very rude. So anyway, it's just a
Well,
transition. It's difficult. Getting off of sugar is hard. I think that's one of the hardest addictions to break than any. I've heard people say that getting off of alcohol, getting off of tobacco, getting off of all of other things is easier than getting off of sugar
mhm,
because your environment doesn't help you any. Your environment's full of it,
mm,
and it's
true.
pushed at you everywhere you go. So it's a tougher thing to get over. But once you're done with it, and it takes a while, you can get over a lot of things pretty quickly. But sugar takes about 4 months or so of not eating any sugar before the cravings start to go away, and all the accidents happen. Oh, gee, you grab that off the shelf and you use it and eat some. Oh, gee, I didn't know that had sugar in it. Well, that's
Mm.
because you didn't read it. The reason you didn't read it is because you didn't want to know. You just didn't want to know. You just, oh, I'm sure that doesn't have any in it, and you buy that. So there's all
Mhm,
these accidents that happen as you're getting off. They're not really accidents, but they seem that way. But eventually, you do about 4 months without any sugar, and now you're over it. So
mm,
and then after a while, you eat the sweet stuff, and it doesn't taste good anymore. This doesn't seem right.
mm.
You know,
Yeah.
you eat somebody gives you something and it has, not, kind of normal sliced white bread on it, and you go, ooh, it tastes like cake. You
Mm,
know, doesn't taste right. So then it becomes a lot easier because then you can avoid things because you really just don't like.
okay. Um, on the topic of veganism, uh, and in the context of ethics, do you see being vegan as a moral issue, as a low entropy choice?
Probably not as far as vegan. I'd see vegetarianism as a moral choice. Um, a lot of and the difference there is basically eggs and dairy. That's the difference
Mm,
between vegetarian and vegan for the most part.
mhm,
Vegans are no animal products. Well, there's a lot of places where the dairy cows and the chickens are hugely mistreated.
mm,
Gross negligence and mistreatment and lousy food and all the rest of it. Now that would be, something that you wouldn't want to support.
mm,
But you shop around, you can find those places where that's not true, where, the cattle are treated, with kindness, and the chickens are not all crammed into tiny little boxes or something. They're allowed to experience being a chicken. And in those cases, then it's less of a problem. So the eggs, now eating the chicken is not nice to chickens. Eating its eggs, well, it just lays eggs. That's what it does. Every so
Mm,
often, it's going to drop an egg, whether it's fertilized or not. That's just the way the chicken is. And if the egg is not fertilized, it just rots. So if the animals are treated well, then vegan, then getting rid of the eggs and the dairy is not necessarily a moral issue. Can be, but doesn't have to be. It just depends on how carefully you shop for those things. Now, as far as vegetarian goes, that is a moral issue. It's a health issue. Both of them are health issues. Eating a lot of dairy products and eggs isn't healthy. It's not healthy, for particularly for older men. A lot of eggs and dairy will create more prostate issues.
mm.
So it's just not in your best interest. It's not healthy. Um, but you have a moral issue eating meat. That's both a health issue. They say that, a thing called the China study was a very good science in that China study, and they basically said that if more than 30% of your what was it, protein, I think, comes from meat, then you push your cancer risk up to be approximately about the same as whether if you smoke cigarettes.
Mm,
So if you're meat for every meal, and you eat a big piece of steak and that sort of thing, where 70-80% of your protein comes from meat, then you've just raised your probability of health issues about the same as if you'd started smoking regularly. So
mm.
it's not healthy to do that. Um, Most health issues will all do better if you don't eat meat. It's So you have a health issue, and then you have the moral issue, killing things because they taste good.
Mm,
Those things are conscious. They have their own strata. Beings are mostly intelligent, and they care for each other, and they care for their young, and they care for a lot of things. They have choices to make, and those choices help them evolve or de-evolve, and they're doing the same kind of thing we are. And to get them and put them in cages so that you can kill them and eat them is just not being very kind. Seeing yourself as better than they are, that you're a superior being, and you can run over them in their free will because you're that superior, that you can do what you want with these things. That's
mm.
just not a good attitude. So that's a moral reason for not eating the meat. There's also a health reason for not eating the meat.
Do you
And
diff oh, do you differentiate between like factory farming versus someone that's going hunting? It's like,
yes, yeah, I would do that. Now, there is some difference there. I mean, there's all levels of there's all levels and stratas of doing wrong things and doing right things, right? It's not like everything's either black or white. So yes, if you support, you know, overcrowding, you know, feeding things trash and treating them badly and beating your animals and all of that, then that's not good. Um, if you go out and hunt, particularly if you hunt with something that gives your game a chance, you hunt with a bow, say, instead of with a rifle. You hunt with a bow, and now you have to be clever enough to get close enough to an animal that you can shoot a bow at him.
mm,
So it's now there's some skill involved in it, and so on. And it's a contest. But still, if you don't need that meat, if you can be healthy without it, then still it's not a good thing to do. It'd be much better to try your skill against taking really good close-up pictures of animals.
mm,
So you can spend your time, sneaking around in the woods and being very clever about whether you're upwind or downwind or other kinds of things to snap a picture, that would be really hard to get if you weren't clever. So there's
mm,
other ways that you can exercise those legitimate kinds of things without killing anything. You don't have to come home with meat. On the other hand, let's say you live out in the bushes someplace and you live off the land. And there's, not a lot of people do that anymore, but there's some that are
mm,
like that. And they don't have jobs, they don't get salaries, they don't go into grocery stores and buy things. They have to live off the land. Well, in that case, if you kill a deer and eat the meat, that's okay. I don't see a moral issue with that. That's just like, you know, tigers kill things and eat them.
mm,
That's because that's what they do. Well, a man is an animal, and if his livelihood and survival depends on meat, because all winter long there aren't any vegetables, the vegetables run out, and you either eat, you eat meat or you don't eat. Then go get yourself some meat. But you don't kill more than you need. Just get by with what you need, and you do it in a way that is very respectful of the animal. So in those cases, I don't see any moral fault there. But most people get their meat at a grocery store, and most people get way more protein than they need. I was told that you need about a person, if you're a weightlifter, that's different, but most normal people need about 20 grams of protein. The meat industry would tell you need like 120 grams of protein,
mm,
but you can get 20 grams of protein without trying. You don't have to look for protein because you get 2 grams here and 1 gram there and 4 grams someplace else. And just eating over a day, you're very likely to get 20 grams of protein. It's not that
mm,
hard. Now, if your diet is potato chips and soda, then you're not going to get any protein at all. You might have to worry about a source of protein. But a normally healthy diet that has a lot of fruits and vegetables in it, you'll get enough protein to get by. You don't need to eat meat. And there's a lot of people who run marathons and lift weights and do other things, and they're vegan,
mm,
and, and they don't feel like they are hurt in that competition by being vegan. They can compete just fine. It just takes
mm,
more trouble, sometimes more expense to go
mm,
that way. Yeah, I see. Probably eating meat will probably the next big moral issue that humanity has to deal with in the next 100 years or so.
mm,
That'll come up, and there'll be more and more vegetarians and fewer meat eaters, and it'll become a thing to talk about. Right now,
mm.
vegetarians are in a small minority, so they don't have much. They don't get a whole lot of credibility.
Right. There's a big push for the carnivore diet, which is essentially only eating meat. And I think people are experiencing a lot of health benefits from just not eating sugar and carbs and preservatives and things, and are attributing that to the meat.
Yeah, but the long term, the meat isn't going to get you quickly. The sugar will smack you immediately. But the eating meat problems, the problems that go with eating meat are things that, you know, 20 years of eating meat, 30 years of eating meat, and you end up with problems that you wouldn't have had if you didn't eat the meat.
Mm,
The eating meat tends to be long-term systemic problems uh, that that are associated with the meat eating. So it's not a thing that's going to poison you on the spot and you'll eat some meat and fall over. It's something that just is a drag on your health. And if you drag on your health for 20 or 30 years, then you have serious health problems at 50, 55, or 60 when you otherwise wouldn't have.
mm.
And our whole culture is like that. We a lot of our illness is just chronic in our culture. Obesity's chronic in our culture. Lots of things, liver and heart failure and stroke and a lot of these things, wouldn't show up if it wasn't for the meat consumption. Well, they
Mm.
might show up eventually. They might show up in your 70s or your 80s or your 90s, but our life expectancy has actually gone backwards, and we're exceptional like that in the, well, what do we call it, the first world or the modern world or whatever. Uh, we are in the in an assessment of healthcare quality, we're like number 43 in the world.
Mm.
We're not we're not too high, and a lot of that is preventative stuff, and we don't do much of that because preventing illnesses is going to ruin somebody's salary, somebody's bottom line. Somebody won't make as much profit if you worry about things like that.
Mm.
In any case, yeah, we don't stand up very well as far as health goes to, say, Western Europe or Northern Europe or even Mediterranean. There's a lot of places that are healthier and more fit than we are and have much better health care than we do. But the one place where we really excel, and we're like 2 or 3 times out ahead of any of our nearest competitor, and that's expense. We pay more for our health care by like a factor of three than any place else in the world. It's
Mm.
the same pills you buy here that cost you $100, you can get for $15 in Canada.
Mhm.
We have the most expensive health. We're like 43rd as far as in how good that healthcare is.
Mm.
Now we're good at high tech stuff. People come from all over the world to get a high tech operation with a with a robot and this and that and the other. We shine there, but that serves mostly a very small minority.
Mm.
Good at some kind of healthcare, but we're not good at just the general healthcare, keeping people healthy.
Right. And I think there's a lot of uh like I know my family members, they don't even make a connection between the food they're eating and their health very much, so
No,
there's a lot
people
of
don't.
education issue, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, people don't. It's just surprising. There's a book you can get that's called How Not to Die, and it's written by a physician that actually did a whole lot of research, and he's one of the few books on diet that actually lists all of his research articles. He has a bibliography like an academic paper.
Uh-huh.
You read an academic paper and there's all the, here's all the resources that I used and the sources. He does that. So
Mm.
he talks about health and food and how food affects health. And then he lists all the articles and studies and so on
Mm.
uh, where he gets that. And if you read that, you'd think that he was some kind of fanatic against meat
Mm.
because he'll, his research shows him that there's a whole lot of things that meat is just a contributor,
Mm.
not even necessarily the biggest contributor, toward that illness, but it's a contributor. It helps make that person less healthy. So meat isn't a thing that, like I say, is real dramatic in how it kills you, like cigarettes and lung cancer. Bingo, you got that one. Meat will help make you less healthy in 100 different ways across, a lot of different kinds of illnesses.
Mm.
It's one of those things that, and they find this stuff out by statistics for the most part. They do studies about, people who have this kinds of diseases and, what kind of diets do they have and what do they eat and so on. And then they end up with uh, pretty strong statistical significance that meat contributes to them because the people that don't eat the meat don't have those kinds of problems or have much lesser problems.
Mm.
But most of it comes out of statistical.
Um, as sort of a final question, kind of switching topics here. Uh, so one thing I've wondered, success in self-inducing an out-of-body experience, would you say that's more an issue of skill, or is it more of an issue of permission? Um, like if
And
there,
not
if the
your
system,
permission. Yeah, the system permission. What you're
system
talking about here,
permission,
not your own permission. Yeah, system permission.
it's just yeah,
I don't think it has much to do with skill. I think it mainly has to do with attitude and the way you think.
okay,
It I don't think it has a lot to do with permission either. I don't think skill. It's not that you do particular things that get you out into the larger reality. It's that you don't do particular things
they keep you up.
that keep you out. And
Uh,
the things that people have trouble with, they have trouble keeping their intellect out of it. You know,
yeah,
just sit by and be open to things. And they're constantly needing to judge and
mm,
assess and analyze. And that is what mostly keeps most people out because you know, what was that? What did I get? You know, was that that or was that that? I don't think it's either one of those. I think it's mostly just attitudinal and learning how to be in an intuitive state. Just be empty and open and be intuitive because all the paranormal stuff has to happen through the intuitive channel. None of it happens in the intellect. Now you can think just because it's intuitive doesn't mean you can't think, but you can't analyze and judge and you know those sorts of things. But you can plan and you can execute a plan. You can do things like that on the intuitive side. But you just have to be open and accepting of whatever it is you get, and then later, much later, judge whether it was useful or not. Judging whether it was real or not is the wrong question. Information is as real as it gets. It's all information, even if you make it up yourself.
mm,
It's all information. It's all real.